Well, hi, folks. My name is Doreen Redmond. I'm the Executive Director of French Programs and Services. And just to kind of give a sense as to our role with MTSS, or the MTSS framework, is I'm one of 3 executive directors that co-lead with the group here that's bringing this presentation together. And that's with Sue Taylor-Foley with Education Innovation Programs and Services, as well as Ann Power with student support and equity, I believe is what that branch is called now. So when it comes to the question of COVID and the impact on our implementation timeline, the inclusive education policy, as was alluded to earlier, was actually implemented in September 2019 through a gradual process. So as Jodene was saying, each one of the regions will be in their own journeys in moving for the implementation of the inclusive education policy in each one of the regions. So the answer will be a little bit different from one region to the next, but the expectation is that we're not stopping. We might need to slow down a bit, but that the implementation of the inclusive education policy is going ahead. Now, one of the interesting things as we're going through and taking a look at MTSS as a model of moving forward, you're going to see in a lot of the support documents and the materials coming forward from the regions and the province in the next month are actually going to be framed through an MTSS lens, from an inclusive education lens. So in a way, COVID is giving us a means to practice what we're preaching when it comes to dealing with education and instruction as we're moving forward. So I know it's not a direct answer to the question, but that's how we're looking at how we're going to continue on moving forward. So I don't know if you wanted a little bit more or more clarity. If not, you can connect with me offline afterwards, or anyone for that matter.
Thanks, Doreen. Okay, so now I'd like to welcome Melissa and Bryan back, and they're going to come back to our original theme, which is planning for all students through a lens of MTSS.
And good afternoon again. So Melissa and I were going to take you through in the next few minutes just an example of taking a look at a general lesson outline and thinking about how we might be able to take some of the components that we had been hearing about recently and sort of put them into action. So a lot of times when you're going through and planning for instruction in your classroom, there's a lot of great things happening already. It's not the point to throw everything out and start again from scratch. But if we take a look at it through a different lens, we might be able to identify some great opportunities that we have in order to try to implement maybe a deeper dive into a UDL approach, or a great opportunity to engage with CRP. And so we'd like to go through and just think aloud with you. This is a great opportunity to go and put in some suggestions that you might have in the chats as you're looking through this like very truncated sample lesson as we think through this together. So in this lesson, this was originally themed around a literacy lesson of some kind. So the learning target is about using the traits of writing in writing. It provides an estimated time frame. And so this is, prior to us putting a more of a critical lens on this. So this is a great opportunity to, again, in the chat, identify some opportunities that you might see in here. The overall goal of this lesson, however, is to, explain to students you're going to be looking at, examples of quote unquote, what makes a good piece of writing, provide students with samples, have them examine those samples, come back together, we create and explain a little bit of an understanding of the traits of writing, and then identify those traits within the writing samples that they were looking at. That seems to be about a good day one summary, and moving on to day two, we'll engage students to create maybe a checklist in Sheets or Excel using the ideas of what makes good writing, provide time to go back to an older piece of writing, use a checklist, maybe assess it. And then an extension there for creating a rating chart using levels of achievement scale 1 to 4 with the writing samples. So that's in general what we would, or a general summary of that specific lesson. And Melissa's going to take you through and identify, so in this lesson, what is the teacher doing? And I'll come back and we'll engage a little bit with what the student's doing, and then we'll identify some opportunities that we have to refine this process.
Hey, thank you, Bryan. So when we look at the lesson that's here and we look through and we think about, well, what is the teacher doing here throughout this lesson? We can see that the teacher is explaining what students will do. The teacher is providing all of the samples, the writing samples for the students to look at. This teacher is telling the students what makes good writing, and they're telling or explaining the writing traits to the students. So the teacher is doing a lot of telling, and a lot of the work is the teacher here. I'll just get Bryan to talk about what in the lesson the students are doing.
Yeah, and the students in this case, when we look through, it's hard to get all of the nuances of what happens in the classroom on, on a sheet of paper that can then be refined and put onto a presentation slide. But in this case, the students are receiving the writing samples. It doesn't indicate if it's independently or collaboratively, but they're reviewing. I think theoretically they're reading those writing samples. And then they're identifying examples within the writing that they've been provided. And so from a student perspective, it's a lot of the receiving of the information, and then they are enacting the plan in this example.
And so some of the barriers that can be identified, and if you notice any barriers here, you can just write them in the chat. Some of the barriers might be the students really don't have a choice in what they get to review. So they're trying to learn about the writing traits, what makes good writing, but they're not given an opportunity to have something that's relevant to them, something that they enjoy. So that might be a barrier and might cause disengagement for students. It shows that the students will come back and share, but depending on how that's done, because it says just here, just share and explain the traits of writing. If there's an opportunity given for students to have voice on what they think good writing is. So I see here the reading level could be a barrier. Yeah, and that's why, giving students choice and what they use, that could support that. Providing a choice board for students. And are the writing samples inclusive? Good question to ask.
Yeah, and then so if we think about this in terms of, I've got this lesson and I really would like to refine it and apply some of these practices. Melissa and I, when we were planning for this, we pulled out three questions to consider, out of a variety of questions in order to do a refinement. And the first one that I was thinking about while looking through this was, if I was a student engaged in the learning experience, would I be actively engaged in creating the criteria for success? That question may help us identify an opportunity where the value of student voice can be felt within the process. And so if I were to make maybe one refinement here, I might have students co-construct criteria at the beginning of this lesson. I'll ask them the guiding question, what makes a good piece of writing? And then I'll be able to hear those experiences, hear the interests that they have there, and be able to use that in order to get that relationship going within the classroom. And of course, this just depends on when this lesson is or learning experience is happening in terms of the time over the course of the year. But that question really helped us to begin that process of the refinement and that ability to value the voice of the learners in the classroom.
And another question that when we were discussing that we thought about was, if I was a student engaged in the learning experience, would I be able to activate my own knowledge and interests? So when looking at this, you're thinking, well, where are the opportunities for students to activate their own knowledge, to bring in their own interests into it? So some of the places, and I think that was mentioned, is what the selection of writing samples, creating a checklist, creating criteria, or in the revamping of writing that they've done themselves.
Yes, and another question in there too, if I was a student engaged in the learning experience, would I feel challenged? And I think that's, you'd have to really know your students in your classroom to, hear their experiences within this lesson. I think that there would be, specific challenges that were presented in the chat there in terms of vocabulary choice. If the writing was sorry, if the writing samples were inclusive, there we go. But that reading level, that might be a potential challenge there. But in the case of this question, it was really more about challenge in the terms of critical thinking. So what is like one pivot that I might be able to make in this lesson to provide students with a safe space with which to take risks, to feel challenged, and this. As Melissa and I were discussing, we threw out some ideas out there, setting up a discussion or debate regarding writing examples, like having them discuss or persuade the other one that their writing sample is an example that is a good piece of writing and why, right? Like that idea of like why it is a good piece of writing and why it might speak to you and why you're motivated to continue engaging with it. Those types of opportunities for communication can help to really create that inclusive environment, because it doesn't necessarily matter what the like the writing source might be or the video or whatever it happens to be. They've got an opportunity to share that passion and to share what makes that specific thing good. And so that, you're developing that level of high expectations for everyone to be involved and everyone to be able to persuade and critically communicate those pieces of information. And in this case too, in terms of the writing sample choice, if you are employing a workshop model or a mini lesson or what have you, that mini lesson, instead of how to identify the traits of writing within that text, you might just want to start with how to select a text that will work for you. Whether that's in the library or whether that's online, that small workshop model of 5 minutes or 10 minutes on how to search on the internet to find a piece of writing that you might be interested in, and then it's time for them to find something that they value, find something that they have motivation to engage with and bring back and share with their peers. It just requires a little bit of pre-planning in order to do that, but that's a high leverage practice that would help to engage students, provide an opportunity for them to choose, to have voice, and to engage in this lesson. And all it took was just a slight reframing of what the students were doing versus what the teacher was doing.
Right, and just to build on what you were saying, about the learning together, learning collaboratively, having groups of discussions about what makes a piece of writing a good piece of writing, and that sharing and discussing, it allows students to learn from one another, and we're also making a space for them to problem solve together and to learn about each other through their experiences of their peers.
Yeah, and so like we invite it back to you. What other opportunities can you see in the lesson? Like what could be a step forward that could be done here? I think this lesson plan, it feels familiar. I would say like this sort of rhythm that we have enacting this in the classroom is very familiar, and this isn't something that needs to get completely thrown away. But in thinking about who's doing what the teacher's doing, what the student's doing, what some barriers might be, and then what opportunities you have, you start to see how the UDL and the CRP, all of those different puzzle pieces do tend to blend together, and it just takes a slight pivot there. Are there any other opportunities in there that anyone is identifying, something that they think might be a good thing, or something that a quick change that they might make to this? If so, pop it in the chat. I was thinking we didn't have an opportunity to really think about sort of that part 2 or the day 2 of this one, but I kind of, just on a personal note, I did like the idea of creating a checklist or a table in Google Sheets and in Excel. That's a great opportunity to engage with technologic fluency. Some students might require a checklist to really help them engage in applying those or using the traits of writing. Not everyone would. If you have one student that does require that checklist, great. If you have a student that doesn't require the checklist, but their exploration of that is the creation of the checklist and identifying when you might want to use certain traits of writing versus others within a given piece of text that they're creating. So there are opportunities within there to have that one-on-one discussion, figure out what that learner might need, and then provide some information there. And Melissa's got a great comment here. So in the initial pre-assessment, you might see where students can pursue different aspects of writing depending on their skill and interest, and thus explore samples for these particular traits as a learning target is broad. Yes, excellent. Absolutely, Melissa. That's wonderful. And so we're gonna pass on to Jodene, but again, if anything else is in there, please feel free to add that in there. I think there's a variety of different opportunities, depending on your teaching style and the students that you have, of course, in front of you, with which to modify and engage. And so we'll pass back to Jodene there just to provide some details about the next session.
Great. Thank you very much, Bryan and Melissa. That was great. So what Bryan and Melissa were just engaged in is what we want the rest of our session this afternoon to be about. So we've developed a series of questions, and we're calling them coaching or planning questions. And we never want to think about it as a checklist. So, I mean, it's hard to organize it in a different way, but it was like if we thought about a set of questions from the student perspective and a set of questions from the teacher perspective. And if you take all of those together, you have that puzzle as a whole. So we're going to put those questions in a moment into the chat box for you to access. And then I also wanted to note that as a team, we spent some time talking about coaching and what it means. Our setting today isn't ideal, obviously, for doing the real kind of coaching that we really aspired to when we first thought about this session. But our aim is to create a safe space where you can collaborate with each other and with us, and take a lesson or a unit that you're thinking about, you've already thought about and have planned. Think about the students you're going to be working with, all of the environment in your classroom, all of those pieces of the puzzle. And then our role as we go out into the breakout rooms, which I'll explain in a moment, is to support you as needed with knowledge or to answer questions, but we don't even need to answer the questions. We're happy to help to have others within the chat rooms answer each other's questions as well. And so, but we'll keep coming back to individuals, Melissa and Bryan. They got together, they gave some thought to it, and it's really interesting to see which each of them, which brought up that they could reconsider or think about if they were to revise it. So just to transition to the chat rooms, we're going to take another quick break, and then the way we're going to do this is, Susan, can you go to the next one? We're going to do 3 breakout groups, grades pre-primary to 6, any teachers in that are working with those grades 7 to 9, and 10 to 12. And those will go up in the chat box in a minute. And we're basically until 3:20, we have that time for folks to get into those groups and to do some collaborating. And when you get there, there'll be 2 of us from our team there to facilitate and get the work moving. We have a few questions just to get everyone's brains, because we've been sitting passively listening. So we have some questions to kind of get you back in the mode of being in the classroom and thinking about working with students.
Jodene, I'm just going to jump in for a second. I want to point out that the links that are in the chat now are not the same as the ones on the slide.
Great. Okay.
Don't worry about that. The ones in the chat are the correct ones.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah, we had to make a change to those. So, and then Sandy, if you have a minute to put the coaching questions there too, the PDF form, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll put them here, and I'll put them in each group once.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, and so when you leave this, you can stay on the line for this meet, and but make sure that you mute your microphone and turn off your video before you go over into the other room. And from here, you can get those coaching questions before you jump into your room, but they'll be over there as well. And then, so we'll meet back in the rooms at 2:40, and then come back again to this large group together just to do a quick debrief at 3:20.
Well, it worked. We got back in. And there's 30 people here still here. Holy smokes.
Yep. We're all here. Great. Well, thank you, everyone. I had the luxury of, and I hope I wasn't irritating anyone, of jumping around to different groups, and it was really great conversations to listen to. So I just wanted to invite the facilitators, so Cindy and Melissa, Bryan and Janet, Ange and Matt, to give us like any kind of reflections on something that they learned, anything that they that got shared in your group that would be really interesting for the whole group to hear. So maybe we can start with the, oh, and sorry, I should open that up. If anybody from those groups as the participants wants to share anything too, we have some time. So let's start with the pre-primary to grade 6 group, Cindy and Melissa.
I'll just start for our group. One of the things that was brought up, and I think was really important, is just the questions that we were discussing. A lot of them were really eye-opening for some of the participants. So, you know, just things to think of as we go further, and the importance of reflecting on what's been done so we continue to improve and get better. That was one thing that's I took.
Great, thanks, Melissa. Cindy, do you have anything to add, or anyone from that group?
Turn my mic on. I felt a little guilty talking too much, and because in the we were talking a little bit about just the role of coaches and how we as teachers, how do we coach our students, and how do we want to be coached, and without jumping into that mode of telling people what to do. And I think that's always a struggle for me, and you know, I think with our teachers, with all of us as teachers, it's something we always have to work on. But strategies like the inquiry-based approach, or helping students work together in groups, or thinking about the big ideas that we want students to acquire, those are all helpful ways to shift our role to that of a facilitator or a coach in learning.
Great, thanks, Cindy. I was going to switch it now to Bryan and Janet. I think Janet might have had to leave, but Bryan, if you're still with us, if you have any thoughts, or anyone from that group, the grade 7 to 9 group. And thanks to everyone who's putting their ideas in the chat group. Sorry, Bryan.
No, that's okay. I am still with you. Yes, yeah, we had some good examples of ways to build a relational approach. You know, initially starting with the families in the community, and thinking about looking at some of the practices during sort of small group instruction, ways to facilitate that. And I think it's important to say too, like this is a shift. There are a lot of components here, and so taking your time to select something that you might want to work on this year, and that starts to grow with every year. Like, we are all on a journey of learning about these things, and we're all in various places, just like our students are as well. So I think that's an important piece of information to communicate.
Great, agreed. And that's just a great segue into, we'll come back to the next group, but it's a good point to stop and just, on this last slide, we've put some additional resources that you can follow up on, and it's through the through your launch page. You can find the inclusive education site. Through GenesPES, you can find the inclusive education site, and then on the main page you can find lots of MTSS resources, including the quick guide. And we're working to get also not just information from the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development, but also all of the amazing resources that are being developed in the regions. So you can keep your eye on that. Okay, so let's finish with Ange and Matt and the grade 10 to 12 group.
Matt, do you have anything you want to share first?
I think one of the important points that came up, thanks Ange, was that the curricula in 10 to 12 may not currently be designed in a way that is well suited to MTSS. There are quite a few outcomes to cover and quite a few concepts, and Doreen pointed out as well that sometimes there are some difficulties in shifting perceptions. But I think something that Bryan and I noted in our grade 7 and 8 curriculum renewal session yesterday is that prior to doing the renewal of 7-8, teachers were doing their best with best practices and relational approaches and CRP to like try and make it fit. And once we got things renewed, the renewed curriculum is designed in a way that allows for MTSS and UDL and all of these best practices. So I think there was an acknowledgement that there is sort of like a square peg round hole with what we have as their 20-year-old curricula for some courses, as Heidi pointed out, but that we still need to do our best as educational leaders, department heads, and just amongst our colleagues to try and show them different ways to adapt to the curricula that's there and to create universally designed lessons and to use MTSS because at the end of the day, that's what's best for students.
So I could start with just ditto, but I'll extend on that and say, yeah, we certainly spent some time talking about that. We talked about the importance of building those relationships. And again, as Matt said, like the key piece is these were all things that we know are going to support our learners. Even if the curricula has not kept in alignment with that, it will, because as students drive through this, it will drive curricula to change as well. And it's certainly going to, provide opportunities for both students, families, and teachers to be able to move forward. So this is it's a very positive move. It is a mindset and a mind shift, and one that everybody in the group seemed to be fully prepared to completely indulge in and start moving forward. So it was a very positive group to work with.
That's great. Thank you very much. So with that, I want to just thank you all for spending your afternoon with us. I think it was a really positive experience as a team to put this together, and we were really excited to share it with you. And I also wanted to just acknowledge Sandy McDougall, who has been here as Sister Moodle the whole time, for picking up and moderating our group and keeping everything moving smoothly. And to Susan Boudreau, who's been in the background, making all of the slides work for us, and always doing a huge amount of organizing for us as a team. So appreciated to both of those. And I hope that this will be, I don't know, where it goes, but I hope this will be the beginning of everyone's learning journey. And I hope that if there's a way you can get in touch with us if you have any questions, or if we can help you with any additional resources, I know that we'd be happy to. So enjoy the rest of your summer and the rest of the Summer Learning Academy.